underdogs, underestimated, we the ones.
It's the Underdogs. We're back. I'm Jordan Brenner. Hi, Peter Keating.
Hey, Jordan. How's it going?
Oh, it's great because I'm with you, as always.
It's exciting is what you're supposed to say. It's exciting time because we're watching history be made before our eyes. It's a thrilling time to be a fan of Underdogs.
But enough about the indictments. Let's talk. We're going to talk a little baseball trade deadline stuff. Peter, you want to revisit your terrible WNBA pick from earlier this year and give us something else to root for the rest of the season. But first, Women's World Cup. We are about to enter the knockout stage, which means we actually have a sense of what these teams are doing. We have some data. We have some real ability to dive into one of our favorite things, which is a one and done scenario, a knockout tournament, and predict some upsets and some underdogs. And Peter, the tournament has been really interesting so far. I want to give you a few numbers to start, and then we can dive in. Okay.
Absolutely.
I'm going to compare it to the 2019 group stage. As you know, the tournament expanded from 24 to 32 teams now. So in 2019, there were shutouts in 22 of the 36 group stage games. That was 61%. Only 2 0-0 games, 8 1-0 games. So there was 1 goal or fewer scored in 28% of the games. Okay. This
so
year,
10 games where there were 1-0 matches. Is that right?
10 games were 1-0 or 0-0. Okay.
No. Right. Okay.
1 or fewer total goal.
Mm-hmm.
This year, there have been 46 matches. There's still 2 to play as we record this. Okay. 35 of the 46 matches have been shutouts. That's 76%. 7 0-0 games, 11 1-0 games. So 1 goal or fewer in 39% of the games. The other interesting thing, of those 46 matches, there have been 8 upset victories, 29 times the favorite one, and there have been 9 draws. So
all right, so wait. Take 1 second and describe why those two things go hand in hand. If scoring is down,
yep,
and teams are even a little bit better at the bottom than we expected them to be, then
right,
all of a sudden you have the conditions for underdogs to start winning all over the place, right?
Right. And what's interesting, so there's a narrative that this has been a crazy World Cup, and you do have some underdogs that have advanced to the knockout stage, like Nigeria, South Africa, etc. But there haven't been a ton of outright wins. Some of the biggest upsets have been draws, whether it was the U.S.-Portugal game or Jamaica getting into the group stage and knocking out Brazil in a 0-0 draw. So it's not outright victories, but you're right. We are seeing more, I don't want to say parity, but a little more competitiveness and balance than we'd expected from the limited data we had going into the tournament. And I think it sets up for a really interesting knockout round. Don't you?
Yes, I do. I mean, look, you're right. With the margins closer, there have been more draws. There have been some pretty big upset wins, even though some of them posted by teams who aren't going to be advancing to the knockouts, right? I mean, Morocco beat South Korea. That was 1-0. New Zealand, to open up this whole tournament, beat Norway. The Philippines then turn around and beat New Zealand, right? These are the kind of things you see when the pack's a little tighter than we expected and scoring is down. That's an awful lot of 0-0 games heading right into the knockouts.
Right. So we'll get into our favorite couple of upset picks in the round of 16 in a second. But I think first we got to start with the U.S. The narrative, obviously, is that this team is in trouble. Only won 1 game in the group stage for the first time ever. Had a listless 0-0 draw with Portugal when last we saw them. And now they're heading into a matchup against Sweden, the 3rd ranked team in the world, who has a real chance of beating them. What's fascinating to me is the U.S. is still favored. The U.S. is, I believe, minus 105 favorites in that match. If you want to pick Sweden to win, because they give a draw as an outcome still for regular time before it goes to penalty kicks. So if you want Sweden to win, you can get them at plus 250.
Jordan, aren't Sweden still ranked weren't they ranked number 3 in the world going into these knockouts, right? And they had a good group stage. But let me play devil's advocate for 1 second and ask you about something. Okay?
But then I want to tell you.
But there's a stat called shot creating actions, right? These are things you do, like passes that lead right to a shot, or recovering a ball on defense close to the opponent's goal, stuff like that. In shot creating actions on defense, and in other words, preventing other teams from creating shots through what they're doing on the field, in expected goals, right? In expected goals from shot created action, the U.S. is still by far the leader in this tournament. They have not allowed opponents to do many things that lead to obvious scores. They haven't allowed a lot of scores. So could it just be some bad luck? Could it just be some playing down to the level of the opponent? Or do you genuinely think there is a lot of concern that the U.S. can't get even past one stage of these knockouts?
I think this team has flaws. It's interesting you mentioned that, because I think the biggest question coming in was maybe their defense, and their strength was supposed to be their attacking play, but they're showing no creativity in the attack right now. And now they're going to be without Rose Lavelle, their best midfield playmaker in this game against Sweden. So look, I want to root for the US, so I'm not personally going to put money on Sweden, but I don't know how you can look at the third ranked team in the world playing well, won their group at plus 250, and not say, just from a pure financial standpoint, it's worth betting on them. I don't know how you can justify the US being, I think the odds have moved now, they're plus 105, but still a significant favorite in this game, other than the fact that it says USA on the uniform.
Okay. I mean, I could see both sides of the argument. I can't see any argument anymore for the U.S. going very far. I can't see the argument for them any better than any of the other teams that look like roughly equal to them. And I do think that if Sweden's an underdog at any point in this betting line, they're a good bet here. And then if they happen to beat the U.S., they're a good bet to keep advancing.
We'll get into that. We'll get into that in a minute. But let's take a look at our favorite potential upsets in the round of 16. We have 6 of the 8 matches are set. We're still waiting to find out who France and Jamaica will play. It'll almost undoubtedly be Germany and Colombia in some order. But Peter, what's one match you've got your eyes on? You know, we got some fun underdogs here. South Africa, Jamaica, Nigeria. What are you looking at in the round of 16?
Jordan, I love Jamaica. Not just because a month ago they were crowdfunding for their travel costs, which is crazy. I mean, there's actually a whole business side story about the underdogs here, which is that when you expand the field, you get countries wanting to compete. Will their federations actually allocate money for them to compete well? That's a really important question. The answer should now be yes, for a whole bunch of countries that brought their players home from all over the world to play in this World Cup and saw some success. But with a 0-0 draw against Brazil, knocking Brazil out of the tournament, Jamaica once again showed on the pitch that not only do they not allow goals, they don't allow many scoring chances. They've conceded 0 goals in the group stage. Now, I just quoted shot creating actions as a stat a while ago, just a few minutes ago. They do allow a lot of shot creating actions by their opponents, but their opponents don't get off good shots. Brazil had, when we get the final numbers, which are not out as the time we're recording, it's going to look a lot like their also scoreless draw that they had against France. Jamaica had the ball 29% of the time. That's it against France. But they again and again and again pursued that counter-striking strategy we have talked about as being key to underdogs. They had more tackles. They had more interceptions. They had more clearances. They had more long balls. They waited and they were patient. They never scored themselves, but they didn't have to. Same thing happened against Brazil. The odds will be long, but that is what you have to do to pull off an upset. So I think whatever the line is when Jamaica finds out who its opponents, there's going to be such long odds that there'll be value there and it'll be a fun bet.
So I could see, I'm very interested, especially if they're playing Colombia, but
yeah,
I'm eyeing, I'm into Switzerland right now. We've talked a lot about in these one and done scenarios.
That's sensible. That's very sensible as opposed to a complete wild card Jamaica bet. I mean, yes, the smart part of my brain wants to agree with you. Yes,
we've talked a lot about in these one and done scenarios how obstructionist play. We saw it on the men's side, right, with Morocco and Japan last cycle, and we see it on the women's side too. Switzerland hasn't allowed a goal yet. They've only scored 2. They're playing Spain, a fantastic team, but I could see Switzerland really frustrating them. This is one where you can get, it's more about the odds. You can get Switzerland to win at plus 750, or if you want to do the double chance where it's a draw after regulation, which I could see this totally going to penalty kicks, You can take Switzerland to win or draw at plus 220. I think there's a lot of reasons, again, based on the obstructionist style we've seen them play, defense oriented, why they have a real puncher's chance against Spain. So real quick before we end the segment, though, you mentioned long shots to win the tournament. The odds have been reshuffled a little bit. The U.S. was the favorite going in. They're now the number 3 team. Peter, if you had to take a team with a little bit longer odds than that, who do you think could come out of, maybe the 5th spot or worse and win the World Cup?
I'd say Japan at plus 900. They led all teams in the difference between expected goals and expected goals allowed in the group stage, and they didn't come by that with cheap wins over really inferior opponents. They crushed Spain 4-0 while playing the kind of obstructionist game you're talking about. Spain touched the ball more than 1,000 times in that game, almost got off no quality shots. I mean, that's what Japan can do, but Japan can also score. Right now, Maezawa leading the tournament in goals. Mina Tanaka, who we thought could be like a goal scorer in some of the games we looked at, leading the tournament in assists. 3 shutouts. Like, what more do you want? They're plus 900. Come on.
Right. We were on Japan from the beginning. Unlike a few teams that we liked, they actually delivered. For me, you teased to it earlier.
Don't mention the downside. We were on Japan from the beginning. That's what people need to know.
All right. For me, you teased to it earlier. I think there's a lot of value in taking Sweden at plus 2,200 to win the tournament. The idea being their toughest task is next, right? But if they get past the U.S., I don't see any reason why they can't go on and win the whole thing. So again, it's a numbers play for me. Plus 2,200. You put a couple bucks down, you have a potential big payoff. So yeah, maybe roll with Sweden if you don't really care what the U.S. does. Tuesday was the baseball trade deadline. Maybe didn't have the fireworks that some people were expecting, but I thought there were some really interesting things that went on. In particular, obviously, the Mets. I was saying to you yesterday that we're the Underdogs podcast, and what the Mets are doing, I think, is really smart, but it's also the ultimate overdog strategy. It may not be replicable for any other franchise, but when you have an owner as rich as Steve Cohen, you can basically treat contracts as sunk costs. That's essentially, he didn't say, I'm picking up $59 million of Justin Verlander's contract as much as he said, I'm saving 20 something million.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially he's buying prospects with the Scherzer deal, the Verlander deal. I think if you have that money to spend, it's a fascinating and smart way to rebuild your team. I just don't think anybody else has that option.
Well, look, big picture, everyone who's smart about financial dealings or money or behavioral psychology or anything says one of the hardest things to get anybody to accept in any walk of life about any decision is it's sunk costs or sunk costs. Steve Cohen not only gets that, he flaunts it. You're right. He actually said that money's already spent when they asked about Scherzer and Verlander. So why not put it towards getting prospects back? Secondly, he's really good at figuring out ways to exploit loopholes in baseball's attempts to stop teams from spending too much money. Normally, you can't just go out and pay somebody $30 million to get a top 100 prospect. He just did it about 4 times, right? At least with Scherzer and Verlander. They got interesting prospects back. Third, to a degree I certainly did not expect, the guys they got back for being willing to blow that money are actually promising. And the Mets did a really good job of identifying players that other teams didn't really think they needed, who would do the Mets a lot of good. I think I was especially impressed with the Verlander trade, right? They had to convince Verlander to go. Verlander already had dealings with Houston where Houston didn't want to pay him the money that he wanted, but he ended up going back anyway, and Steve Cohen took care of the tab. But they also got back 2 guys who were pretty promising. Drew Gilbert, who's at least a top 100 player, and Ryan Clifford, who has massive power. The Mets got a whole gaggle of teenagers, right? Which supplements their recent attempts to build it through the draft. But the draft's only gone well for them in the last couple of years. They've not done a great, outside of international free agent signings, they've not done a great job of developing position players. Well, now they have a whole bunch of them, and they just spent a whole lot of money to get them. You're not supposed to do that. He's really good at figuring out how to do that.
So the Mets, to me, were one of the fun parts of the trade deadline. The part that I did not find fun was I really didn't think many of the underdogs who have a chance here acted as much as they should have. Now, I say this with a caveat that because of the expanded playoff field and the elimination of the waiver trade deadline, right? That you have to make these decisions right now, August 1st, and more than half of baseball thinks they still have a chance to make the playoffs. So there just aren't as many potential sellers, but there's some really fun underdog stories that we've been talking about over and over and over again. The Baltimore Orioles, the Arizona Diamondbacks, the Cincinnati Reds, the Miami Marlins. And other than the Rangers, I just don't think there was enough aggressiveness for some of these teams to really stock up on weak spots for the postseason. And I get that, especially with a team like Cincinnati or Baltimore, that part of the appeal is building a sustainable team with these great farm systems and youth, but you don't know that you're going to be in the same position a year from now. You have a legitimate chance to win something. I'm a little disappointed they didn't do more to bolster.
So I think there's three groups of these teams. One, yes, Baltimore, Tampa used to be like this, but Cincinnati definitely. I think it's really hard once you fall in love with the young players you've developed to want to deal prospects for supplementary talent. I don't know if it's hard to be good at both of those things at the same time. Also, once you're Baltimore or Cincinnati, other teams are going to come calling for Gunnar Henderson or Christian Encarnacion Strand. Like, they're going to want players who you don't want to deal. So I think they're psychologically not in an easy spot. However, there are other teams that are not far out of the pennant race who should have been far more aggressive, and it's hard to understand what the hell they're doing. What are the Cleveland Guardians doing? They trade Ahmed Rosario for Noah Syndergaard, below replacement level pitcher at this time. Jordan, quick, who's Cleveland going to play at shortstop? They don't have a shortstop. Why did they deal their starting shortstop away for a pitcher who doesn't have it anymore? I'll tell you why. Because they traded their best starting pitcher, or one of their two or three best starting pitchers, for a first base prospect from Tampa, Kyle Manzardo, who doesn't have any power. What are they doing? They signed Josh Bell and Mike Zunino this year. They thought that was going to take them over the top. When it didn't, they decided to what? Cash it in, not compete? What are they, a game and a half out of first place behind Minnesota? Like, you're right about that. There are some teams that are confounding in their reluctance to be aggressive just at the time when it should be easier than ever for them to compete in their divisions. Cleveland bombed out.
Rosario's also been playing below replacement level. So it's not like they obviously don't think he's very good. So I have, again, you and I differ. I have no problem with teams selling. No one knows their own team better than themselves. If you're not good enough, that's one of the toughest decisions to make, but you have to have conviction about it. It's one of the reasons I'm disappointed in the Yankees, because you and I can look at the Yankees and say they're not good enough, but I don't know if they were just holding on to these pieces, hoping for a return that wasn't possible, but there are pieces they could have sold off pretty easily and gotten some influx of young players. So yeah, I think getting Noah Syndergaard back is super weird, but I love the Savali trade with Tampa for Cleveland. I think they have to continue to be, with their payroll, smart and honest with themselves about where they stand. And in that division, you can turn things around very quickly, unless you're the Kansas City Royals.
Well, right. By the way, the Royals trade another team that makes their trades make no sense, and their player development is horrible. Wake me up when MJ Melendez hits 225. Okay. I mean, these players come up, have a little bit of hope for them. Hope is Kansas City, whereas hope for prospects goes to die. But that's an ancillary point. Jordan, what I'm concerned about is the team smart enough to do what you're talking about? Maybe clustering in large market areas. Like, we love Baltimore and Cincinnati because they've been able to maintain that small market mentality, budget, and prospect development all at the same time. But I think the teams that are best at picking up other teams' used or spare parts and converting them into really high value are actually the Dodgers and the Yankees. And if they don't want to go for it, they think it's because their roster is either filled out enough already or because this is not the right year to go for it. I mean, the Yankees probably think right now, with Aaron Judge hurt and all the injuries they've had, if they win 89 games and either make or don't make the playoffs by one game, it's a pretty good season. Their fan base is completely opposite minded to that, but I don't think that's wrong. I think they were pretty smart. What big changes are you going to make to the Yankees? Now, the Dodgers picked up a couple of guys whose stats look terrible, and I guarantee you that they will improve with the Dodgers, right? Lance Lynn last night looked better than he had in his last 15 starts with the White Sox. There's some teams that know how to fix players whose numbers say they're garbage. I don't think Cleveland or Kansas City are those teams. I think the Dodgers and the Yankees are. The Yankees just didn't add anybody like that this time around.
Yeah, you don't need much to tell me that this Yankee team isn't good enough to, to even make the playoffs, let alone do anything when they get there. And to me, they had success in 2016 selling off bullpen pieces. Teams are always looking for bullpen arms at this time of year. And we found that, year to year, there's fluctuation in that skill set. And if you can sell high on guys like that, the Yankees have a history of developing relievers. I think it's important they start to get some young position players in their system. But
their bullpen's already pretty good. They need a starting catcher. They need a starting baseman.
No, they don't.
They need Volpe to play. They need Volpe to play better.
I'm writing off this year. I'm saying get rid of trade Clay Holmes, trade Wandy Peralta. You can find more bullpen arms next year, write off this season, and get some young talent, because I'm sorry, they're not good enough. They have no one in left field. DJ LeMahieu was a shell of himself. They don't have a catcher. Stanton and Rizzo. It's gross. It's gross.
That's what's really interesting about that is that means they're not just constrained by what the fans believe, which is that Hal Steinbrenner won't let them spend enough money. They're actually constrained by what the fans think and do, because the Yankees cannot afford to be open sellers. They can't cash in on this season yet. They can't write it off. Yankees are not actually allowed to write off a season. That's fascinating.
I think that's a false narrative. I think people were fine when they did it in 2016, and I think people would be fine if they did it if they saw the light at the end of the tunnel of some of these guys no longer being on the roster going forward. Peter, did you know that other than Aaron Judge, they have no one in their everyday lineup with an OPS above 800? It's unbelievable. They can't hit. But
at least they don't have Dan Vogelbach batting fifth. I do want to mention one other category of teams which we saw actually have some success. Teams like Pittsburgh, who signed veterans for 1-year contracts, planning to deal them off, and then did deal them off. I thought the Pirates made some intelligent moves, and I think they could be the next team breaking out in that division with some young talent. Their 1-year rental policy, which is hard to stick to. I mean, if you sign a Carlos Santana and he's better than expected and people like him, and you don't have anyone else on the team that anybody knows, sometimes it's hard to get value for somebody like that. But they did in a couple of places.
Real quick,
Milwaukee too, added a couple of on-base guys, which I think could be a big difference for that team.
Real quick, in light of the trade deadline, anyone popping up as an Underdog World Series contender that you weren't thinking of before?
That I wasn't thinking of before. I like Texas more than I did before but I mean, they were already a contender, but
they're still plus 1100. I support that pick,
and they're going for it.
Yep. Yeah. Rangers plus 1100. I'm with you. All right. Well, fresh off his disastrous preseason pick of the Phoenix Mercury as a WNBA underdog, Peter wants another bite at the apple. So Peter, who's getting your attention now, and why do they have a chance to win a championship in the WNBA?
That's not the best way to ask for a mulligan. It seemed like a reasonable flyer at the time, but it's a
fun way to ask for a mulligan.
Jordan, when betting underdogs, you have to be ready to zag when everyone's zigging, right? Right now, everyone is down on the Washington Mystics. Everyone is kind of paying more attention to the Minnesota Lynx as a team on the way up. They had a great week. Look, Elena Delle Donne is finally back to all-star form after 3 years of working to get back to where she was one of the very best players, MVP in the league. She's hurt. 4 other players on the Mystics are hurt. Christy Tolliver, Ariel Atkins, they go down the roster, but nothing really serious. When these women come back, this team is going to be a powerhouse force.
Powerhouse force.
Yeah, a powerhouse and a force and everything else you want to say.
Okay.
Look, they've lost their last 3 games. They're under 500 for the first time. They're 12-13. This is the perfect time to pick up a bet on them, to find the value in them. They're plus 4,500 to win a championship right now. This is a 2.5 team race. That's true. The Aces and the Liberty are powerhouse forces, Jordan, and you can never count out Connecticut. So what's really important is you need the number 5 seed to avoid playing one of those top 3 out of the 8 in the first round. Once you get by there, if Elena Delle Donne's anything close to her full self, which she was before she injured her ankle, this is a good team to throw some money down on.
Isn't it just burning money to think anyone's going to knock either of those powerhouse forces off?
Well, a couple of them probably have to play each other in the playoffs. Maybe the Ace and the Liberty won't face each other until the finals. But you got to remember, Jordan, the WNBA playoffs are subject to a lot of randomness. They do still have 3-game series, right? And there are very few former MVPs floating around the league outside those teams. Washington is one, and you're getting great value. And you're getting them low right now because they've been so banged up. Got 2 games coming up against the Sparks this weekend. Going to tell us an awful lot about how they're going to look going forward.
All right. Well, that's it for another dramatic episode of Underdogs. We'll see you next week.